Hello and welcome to Knots by Kiara. This is the Addi series. So today I'm on the plain knitting setting and I'm going to show you how to do a cast on and cast off with a scrap or waste yarn so that you can create a border with your panels. So first you're going to go under that very first black hook around the back of the next hook and repeat that pattern all the way to the very end of the very last white hook. And just to make sure you got that, it's underneath one hook or on the back of the next. And your yarn is not in the bobbin just yet. And now that you've reached the very last white hook, you're going to loop your yarn under that red little bump there. And you're going to put your yarn in through the bobbin. And next you're going to turn your wheel in the opposite direction. And watch as that yarn loops around the red bump and underneath that very first white hook. From there, you're just going to pull that yarn through, take it nice and slow, so that way you can make sure that every hook grabs onto the yarn. And by doing this, you can make sure that you don't skip anything. So now right here, just make sure that that yarn goes under the red bump and around on the top. And you're going to just go slow on the beginning and the end of each row. And then you can pick up your pace in the middle if you're up for it. As long as you're keeping the same tension throughout the whole time, you should do just fine. Now for your scrap yarn or your waste yarn, all you really need is about 5 to 10 rows. And the reason for this is because all you need is just to see where you need to create your border off of. Because you'll see once I start with my color row, you'll be able to see it in a bit here. The very first row of the color, you'll actually be able to see it where you have to pick up those loops with a crochet hook or knitting needles depending on your preference there. So I'm just going to do one more back and forth here. And that'll bring me to about 8 rows here. And now that I've reached my 8 rows, I'm going to cut my yarn, create like a bit of a tail here just so I can see the ending of my scrap yarn. So that's about the tail length there. And I'm going to open my bobbin and take that piece out. Next I'm going to join in my color that I've chosen for my project. And I'm using a camel colored yarn. And you're going to pinch the 2 yarn strings together and insert it into the bobbin. Make sure that your first color yarn goes under the second black hook. And the reason for that is just to make sure that it grabs into the next few. And you're going to pull it through, holding the same tension as you did with the very first color of your scrap yarn. And all the way to the end, making sure it goes under that red bump, around and under the very first hook. Now if you notice right here, you can see that I have a very good contrast between white yarn and camel yarn. This is going to help me a lot when I do my border, because then I'll actually be able to see where I need to pick up the stitches. If you're using colors that are too close to the same, it makes it kind of hard to figure out the difference. So now from here, you can kind of guide your string and you can guide your pacing. What I like to do on mine is I hold slightly tight on the beginning and end, but not too tight. And then I kind of loosen up and help it around that little red bump at the end. And that just helps me kind of guide the tension and make sure that it gets grabbed on. Now one thing you do want to be sure of is that you're not going too tight on pieces and then too loose on some pieces. You have to be sure that it's the right tension length for the entire project. Or not length really, but the right tension force. There we go. Now this is how it's going to look on the sides here. And this is how it looks on this side. You can see your tails right there. Now if you were to do a color switch, you would just have to do the same thing, add in another color at the beginning of the row, but instead of just leaving the tails there, you would just tie the two tails together. And those bumps up top, that's your first row where you're going to crochet or knit into. And this is the back side of the machine. This is a kind of cool looking view here. So you can see how the white hooks go up and down and how they grab onto that yarn. It's kind of a cool looking thing. Looks like a bit of an ocean wave or a crowd wave. And from here, you can kind of see how I grab mine. I like to hold my yarn in a certain way that helps me keep the same tension. But everyone has a different preference on how to hold their yarn. So there's no right or wrong way, just whatever works best for you. So now with this, I'm just going to go back and forth until I've reached the length that I need for my project. And I went ahead and cut my yarn. That's my color yarn. And now I'm putting in my second round of scrap yarn. So just like I did in the beginning, I pinched my two pieces of yarn together. And nice and slowly, I roll my handle away. And I just make sure that the yarn hooks underneath that first black hook. Or second black hook there, sorry. That's the second one there. I'm going to hold my yarn, making sure my color yarn stays under and my working yarn is inside the bobbin. And again, for this one, go nice and slow to make sure that it goes underneath every hook. And from here, it's the same thing as the beginning. You're going to do about 5 to 10 rows, just so that way you can see the difference of where you're going to have to create your border. Now let's say you only had enough yarn for about 3 or 4. It's still possible. It's just easier to see when you have a bigger section of waste yarn. And this is kind of how the top view looks here. Now this is actually my favorite way to get the yarn off the Addi machine, just because it's so simple, and I do like to make different kinds of borders on my panels, so it's kind of fun and helps me get creative. But this way, taking it off the machine, it's pretty awesome. And I'm just going to get back to the beginning right here. And from here I'm going to cut my yarn because I don't need any more waste yarn, because now I can clearly see those first bits of the color round, or the last bits I should say. Alright, so now I've ran out of my scrap yarn color and I'm just going to keep spinning my wheel. And from here the machine is actually going to take the yarn off all by itself. So you're going to go back and forth one more time all the way around. And then again with the very start, and with the start and the finish of the last little strand, that's when you're going to have to help your machine out a little bit. And if you look closely here, you can see that first row of color right there, and that is where you're going to crochet or knit into. And you'll be able to see exactly how I do that in my very next video of the Addi series, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below.